I have been tracking a ghost signal through this blizzard for 3 weeks. Sector 4 is supposed to be completely empty. A dead zone on every map, a desolate frozen wasteland where even the military stopped flying decades ago. But out here, the wind does not just howl, it screams like something massive is being torn apart in the sky. The snow hits my visor like shattered glass, making it almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead of my boots. Every step requires all my strength just to push through the heavy drifts. And yet, after 21 days of pure whiteout conditions, I finally found the source of the transmission. Outpost 31. An old-world deep ice drilling facility, half swallowed by a massive, creeping glacier. The exterior structural towers are violently bent and twisted from the sheer crushing weight of the moving ice. But something is immediately, terrifyingly wrong. The heavy exterior blast doors are not just closed. They are welded shut. Not from the outside to keep the storm out. The heavy, messy, desperate weld marks are on the inside. Whoever was in there, they locked themselves in, and they made absolutely sure nobody could follow them. It took me 2 exhausting hours with a thermal torch to cut through the reinforced steel. The bright orange sparks fought against the freezing white wind, and my hands were going completely numb despite the heavy heated tactical gloves. When the massive steel door finally groaned open, tearing the ancient ice apart with a sickening metal screech, the smell that hit me was not decay. It was absolute, sterile cold. A cold so deep it burned my lungs. The temperature gauge on my suit immediately dropped past -40 degrees and kept falling. The emergency backup lights are still pulsing with a faint, dying red glow, casting long, unnatural shadows across the frost-covered walls. The silence in here is heavy, thick, almost deafening compared to the storm outside. There is no hum of generators, no ventilation fans turning, just the slow, heavy crunch of my own boots on the frozen steel floor. Every breath I take turns into a thick cloud of white steam that hangs in the still air. As I moved deeper into the facility, down the long, pitch-black corridors, I noticed the frost on the walls was unusually thick. It almost looked like white, frozen moss spreading aggressively across the exposed pipes and electrical conduits. I passed by the main living quarters. The doors were left wide open. Personal belongings, cracked data pads, and coffee mugs were left exactly where they were abruptly abandoned. There was no sign of panic here. No overturned tables or bullet holes. Just a cold, calculated retreat to the center of the base. Finally, I reached the main control room at the heart of the facility. I pushed the heavy door open and my flashlight beam caught them in the darkness. 5 human figures sitting in a tight circle around the main communication console. They are wearing heavy yellow biohazard suits, completely covered in a thick layer of white frost. They look like statues carved out of solid ice, frozen perfectly in time. I stepped closer, shining my bright light directly onto their visors, trying to see inside the helmets. There are no signs of a struggle. No weapons drawn. No barricades constructed inside this room. They just sat here in the dark and willingly let the extreme cold take their lives. I walked up to the central console. The main terminal was encased in a thick block of clear ice, but the primary data drive was still slotted securely in the machine. I extracted it, brushing away the thick rime with my thumb, and plugged it into my portable decryptor. The small screen flickered to life in the darkness, throwing a pale blue glow on the frozen bodies around me. What I found in their final encrypted audio logs made my blood run colder than the dead air in this room. They were not just drilling for deep geological samples. They were looking for something very specific. A biological anomaly buried exactly 3 miles beneath the ancient ice shelf. An organism trapped in a suspended state for millions of years. And God help us all, they actually dug it up. The decrypted logs detail the meticulous extraction of a deep core sample that contained a strange, dark, fibrous material. They brought it up to the surface lab, right down the hall from where I am currently standing, to study it under the electron microscopes. That was their first and ultimately their final mistake. They applied heat to the sample. They thought it was dead. They assumed it was just fossilized organic matter from a forgotten, prehistoric era, perfectly preserved by the extreme cold of the Arctic. But as the ice melted in the warm, sterile laboratory, the dark fibers began to twitch and move on their own. It was not an animal. It was not a conventional virus. It was something much older, something that did not follow the basic rules of our terrestrial biology. The chief medical officer's voice on the recording was shaking violently, barely a whisper over the static of the microphone. He described in horrific detail how the organism did not attack them physically. It did not bite or claw. It assimilated. It entered the facility's central ventilation system through a microscopic breach in the sealed containment chamber. The base's internal biometric sensors started picking up unusual biological signatures growing inside the walls, spreading through the water pipes, and eventually multiplying inside their own bloodstreams. The incubation period was shockingly fast, taking less than 12 hours from the first invisible exposure. The symptoms were not pain, coughing, or a high fever. It was a slow, terrifying erasure of the human self. The infected simply stopped acting like themselves. Their personal memories started fading, human emotions disappeared completely, replaced by a cold, collective, buzzing instinct. They were rapidly becoming something else. Something ancient, incredibly patient, and endlessly hungry. The audio logs documented their desperate, frantic attempts to synthesize a cure. They tried heavy radiation, toxic chemical burns, extreme electrical shocks. They turned the pristine medical bay into a bloody war zone. Nothing worked. The organism actually fed on the thermal and electrical energy they used against it. The harder they fought it, the faster it spread through the entire facility. By day 4, the main communications array was deliberately sabotaged. Not by the organism itself, but by the infected members of the crew who were no longer in control of their own minds or bodies. They wanted the infection to spread. They wanted to call for an emergency evacuation team to come and rescue them. Their only goal was to bring the alien infection back to the populated mainland. That is exactly when the base commander made the only terrible choice left to him. I am looking at his frozen body right now, illuminated by my flashlight. He is the one sitting closest to the main reactor kill switch. He realized that the organism thrived on warmth and living tissue. If it ever reached the outside world, it would consume every living thing on the planet in a matter of weeks. So he initiated the final winter protocol. He intentionally ruptured the main reactor coolant lines. He flooded the entire lower levels with sub-zero liquid nitrogen and completely disabled the emergency override systems, destroying the control panels. Then he ordered the remaining uninfected crew members to gather in the main control room. They sealed the heavy blast doors from the inside. They actively chose to freeze to death in the freezing dark rather than let this nightmare escape the ice. I turned off my portable decryptor. The red emergency light flickered and died above me. And then I noticed something. A sound. A very quiet, rhythmic sound echoing faintly in the absolutely silent room. Drip, drip, drip. I shined my bright flashlight down at the frozen figure of the base commander. The thick ice on his yellow hazard suit was glistening under the beam. A single drop of liquid water fell from the bottom of his visor and hit the steel floor. My breath caught in my throat. The ambient temperature in the room. My heated thermal suit. The heat radiating from my own body and my portable generator over the last half hour. I have been standing in this sealed room for 30 minutes. The temperature is slowly rising. The thick frost on the steel walls is starting to sweat. I leaned in closer, looking directly at the commander's frozen faceplate. Underneath the thick layer of ice, just behind the dark glass, something dark and fibrous twitched in the shadows. It is not dead. It is just patiently waiting for the ice to melt. I did not hesitate for a single second. I grabbed my heavy gear, turned around, and ran. I sprinted frantically back through the dark, twisting corridors, slipping and sliding on the melting ice, my heart pounding loudly in my ears. I burst through the heavy steel door and out into the screaming, blinding blizzard. I dropped my pack in the snow, grabbed my thermal torch, and ignited it. The flame roared to life, blindingly bright against the dark storm. I pressed the heavy steel doors tightly together and began to weld them shut from the outside. I poured every ounce of fuel I had into sealing that gap, melting the heavy steel until it fused into a solid, unbreakable scar. I will leave this cursed place to the storm. I will permanently erase these coordinates from my map. Some things are meant to stay buried in the deep ice forever.